I want to ask you then about this other moment that caused some folks on the left to become distrustful of you, which is that the Intercept uniquely, I think, is perceived as one of the most serious, like a real serious news organization that it has left politics. And so for that reason, I believe, is able to get some pretty important interviews with progressives where they know they can come and get a fair hearing. Unlike when they go on CNN, are going to have to answer questions like, but isn't it mean to cut CEO pay or whatever? So you have had access to these people in a way that most of us in the Force the Vote movement haven't. And when you had an opportunity to interview Pramila Jayapal, I know that I, for one, was frustrated that it seemed like you didn't press her on the rationale that she used to defend her inaction at that moment.
Right.
Which was, as a refresher, that she didn't want to risk Kevin McCarthy becoming Speaker of the House. The idea being that if you don't elect Nancy Pelosi, somehow the Republicans would have a majority that would enable a Republican to become Speaker of the House, which logistically isn't possible unless a bunch of Democrats were to cross the aisle and vote for Kevin McCarthy, because it's whoever gets over the 50% threshold, not just who has a bare majority.
Yeah, right. Basically, as long as the reason that like the Force the Vote movement knew this is because I had explained it to Jimmy Dore.
Thank you. You're a real mensch.
Real mensch. Well, he reached out when he saw my initial argument. He's like, "Do you want to come on the show?" And I'm, "Yeah, absolutely, sure, I'll come on the show." I will add, he never uploaded the video after agreeing with me all the way through. This is not your. You don't have to answer for your man.
You should get back together.
I'll go back on. I don't care.
I will
happy
DM
to go back
Jimmy
on.
about having you back on the show.
I'm happy to go back on. He can call me all the names in the book, but he won't. He will wait until I'm off the show, and then he'll call me names, which is what he did that time. That clip exists because Jimmy actually posted it to dunk on Cenk. Because Cenk had been saying, "You're going to make McCarthy Speaker," and Jimmy Dore's like, "Look, I had Ryan Grim on, respected congressional reporter," and like he said that that's not true. And so, functionally, basically, anybody who's voting against Pelosi who's not a Republican would have to vote for somebody else, Briahna.
Do it,
Speaker Briahna, and that is then recorded as a vote for a person, and it gets added to the total, and so then Pelosi doesn't have a majority, and then it goes back. And so, yes, like I'll like cry uncle on that one, like for sure. Like if I had that interview to do over again, and she's like, but it's a difference between McCarthy and Pelosi, I'd be like, well, not on that day. Like that's not right. Like basically you'll go back to caucus. You'll fight it out, and either another speaker candidate emerges or you get your concessions, and then everybody agrees and goes back to the floor. And everybody has to agree, because if the Blue Dogs are like, no, I'm not doing so and so, or I'm not doing Katie Porter as speaker, then she don't, so. But eventually they find, and it has taken days in the past, to find a speaker. So yeah. Fair enough. Like, yeah. I guess I like here, and the irony is, like, I felt like I was like doing a solid to the Force the Vote people by asking at all about it, because in like my preference at that point was to move on. It had gotten so toxic.
It's lots of people's preference, but I won't let it happen.
And so then later I'm like, shit, I should have done that, and I'm getting dunked on here, and yeah. I just didn't think of it in the moment as the follow-up, because a lot of like my interviewing style, I'm not Mehdi Hasan, who's like listening for every word that's slightly off from his interlocutor, and then just like grabbing onto it and breaking their leg with it. In my mind, I'm like, which moves a lot more slowly than most people's, and definitely Mehdi's, and definitely yours. I'm thinking of my next question. And so I need to do a better job of like absorbing the question and like responding to it. Anyway, so yeah.
Well, look, what I would say is that my main frustration was that if you are really keyed into the arguments that are being made by the Force the Vote people.
Oh, by the way, and I did get a Jayapal answer that I want to go back to and listen to, because when she said that this wasn't her like moment of leverage or whatever, and maybe it was actually my follow-up to this one, I don't remember, but she was like, we didn't have leverage for these different reasons at that point. I was like, well, when would you have leverage? And I mentioned, I was like, and I basically said something like, so it would have to be something that no Republicans are going to vote for, which means it's very narrow, and that it's not like the debt ceiling where the global financial system is going to collapse, because you're not nobody believes that you're actually going to blow up the global financial system.
Don't let me be in Congress.
Oh, they believe the Freedom Caucus will. Yeah,
right. I'm like, why not?
Fucking blow it up. But so, and basically what she said was an infrastructure package that was going to get no Republican support because the Republicans hate Democrats. Like something like an infrastructure package would be a place where they would have enormous amounts of leverage, and they would use that leverage. So she's on record then. And so I should go back and find that quote, or if somebody else is listening, go find that quote, put that quote out, tag her, and be like, look, game on.
You're exactly right to differentiate between something like the Affordable Care Act or potentially even a $15 minimum wage, things that Republicans have said, no way, we're not going to do this, versus, for example, perhaps a transportation infrastructure package or other things like that.
So I wonder if that's why we're seeing this really, I don't want to use the word coordinated, but it feels like someone gave everyone permission to go ham about the infrastructure bill in this moment. Not just the progressives, you have them going on like Joyanne Reid nodding enthusiastically like, oh yes, corruption. I'm very invested in getting money out of politics for the first time in my entire career. Like, it feels like the gloves are off.
I think the permission came when Biden told Shelley Moore Capito on Monday, I guess it was, when he said these talks are over. I think that filters down to other Democrats who are like, oh, Biden just did something like actually decisive.
I mean, whatever, maybe Biden.
Something happened. Something happened.
Something happened, and I want to get back to that, but I do want to stay on that point for a second, which is that with the interview, I understand that people have different interview styles, and it can be easy to miss a follow up. People complain to us at Bad Faith all the time about having missed something in an interview, and people will probably complain about this as well. But if my feeling at the time was, if you are really following and invested and have like respect for the case that the force the vote side is making, then you would know that Kevin McCarthy argument was one of the most specious and prevalent arguments being used against us. And the second the word McCarthy was out of her mouth, it should have been like, red flags, this is where we nail her. Like, this is where it's going down. I would have been waiting with bated breath for her to try to use that excuse with me.
Please
try to McCarthy me.
Right. And that there's an asymmetry. Like, I never actually even wrote an article about this.
Yeah, I think I was the only one in America who did.
and Sirota.
And Sirota, for sure.
And so I wasn't as attuned to the buzzwords as I should have.
But this is the thing, Ryan.
Even though it's like defining my presence at the time.
To get involved.
Yeah, I totally.
Without knowing what you're that is in and of itself the sin.
It's like leave the party. Like you're late for the party. You don't know what's going on. Just go.
It's like fair. It's like it's like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer slapping on a kente cloth mask and kneeling down and having lots of thoughts and feelings like they're going to come to the cookout and explain to me how to make potato salad. Just stay out of it if you don't know.
What you call George Floyd? What was it?
Oh,
Johnson.
Some other person from like 1976. Sorry, no offense. I don't mean to be an ageist, but I love an old queen, but she's not the one. Right. So, okay, there was that, and I will say, and I don't want to like belabor this other point because I would rather have the conversation directly with the person who conducted the interview. But with respect to people's frustration with the Intercept as an institution, which, I value the Intercept reporting enormously, and I don't want there to be that schism. I want there to be a possibility for trust to be regained. But along with your interview, that one other interview was Jeremy Scahill's interview with AOC. And the fact that he similarly seemed to softball the issues around force the vote during that interview. And then also this weird question about Julian Assange that was softballed made a lot of people just feel like access to these politicians was more important than holding them accountable. And when you have journalists, I think part of the backlash was because people do respect you and Jeremy so much that they have higher expectations. They don't expect you to like let stuff like that go because you're not, you know, Brian Stelter or whatever.
Right.
Sorry, no offense. I mean, whatever. You know, like, you know, so I bring this up not because I'm trying to turn a screw, but because I think that if you
remember exactly what? So he asked about Pelosi, and she said,
I think she gave the same excuses.
She should not be speaker, but there's nobody else.
There's nobody else.
And then he moved on to the next question.
Yeah, that's my recollection.
Right. And he asked her, and you could ask him this. He called me ahead of time. So I'm interviewing AOC, and anything I should ask her about. I was like, well, definitely ask her about all of this Pelosi and forced to vote stuff. Like this, that's the big thing on the internet. Like that will do very well if you ask about that. And that was all I said. And also, I did not set up the interview.
You got to prep him,
so,
you got to prep him.
My job to prep this dude.
And maybe, like, and here's the other thing. Like, you did ultimately do a forced vote episode. That the interview with Pramila Jayapal. Mm-hmm. You also interviewed an NNU
from NNU, yeah,
representative. And there's a world where you could have also had a forced vote advocate, Cornel West, Kyle Kulinski, Crystal Ball. I'm not saying myself necessarily.
You're always welcome on Deconstructed.
Well, I appreciate that. But that would have, you know, and if we had been in the interview together, then it wouldn't have fallen on you to call out whatever Jayapal said. You know, there would have been other counterbalances. Yeah. But, points made. I think that, you know, when we talked the other night, you know, you were like, if I get those opportunities again,
sure, yeah. So I'm happy to. And so, and also on the one, just to clarify something, I had nothing to do with Jeremy getting the interview.
Sure.
And I've seen this said by certain comedians that like I took the position so that Jeremy could then get an interview with AOC. And it's like Jeremy interviewed AOC on his podcast while she was a candidate. He has a separate relationship with her. If he invites her onto the podcast, she's often probably going to do the podcast. Like I didn't have anything to do with that.
I'm
not saying you did. This is just for the people.
Okay, for the people.
To that point, like starting in like 2009 is when I went to the Huffington Post, and like the most effective use of me at the time for, you know, the blogosphere at the time which is now transformed into Twitter, podcasts, and YouTube. Like there's this kind of a parallel there. Was that I was one of, actually at the start, I was the only like openly progressive reporter who had a congressional credential and could walk around the halls of Congress. Mm. And in the speaker's lobby on the House side and in the Senate outside the chamber, people are just standing around. They don't even ask who you are. You just put a microphone, tape recorder in front of their face, and you ask them questions. And so it was the easiest job I've ever had in my life. And like a year later, I think TPM hired a reporter. So I finally had some competition asking like just basic questions. So I was writing 5-6 stories a day because all I had to do was walk up to some Democrat and say, hey, you know, where are you on EFCA, which was the union bill at the time, that's the version of the PRO Act, and it flopped. In fact, I asked Ben Nelson, who was this, I guess, Nebraska senator, on like day one, I'm like, where are you at on EFCA? He's like, I'm against it, forget it. And boom, they didn't have 60 anymore. I reported that, and everybody just gave up. It was the most pathetic thing I've ever seen.
It's your fault, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think they were getting that sucker passed, or nor did they ever have an intention to. But where are you on a public option? Okay, this person says this is what they're on a public option, and then from there doing more, sophisticated stories that explained to people that were not inside Congress, you know, who the powerful people on which committees were, and blah blah. And so that was my kind of value add to that kind of ecosystem out there, that I could just provide them with information. And so in that spirit, I do want to have on somebody, whether it's Jayapal, AOC, somebody, and say like, look, here are all of the arguments. What were you thinking at the time, because I do have, because of the congressional pass and because I've known so many of these people for so long, do have the ability to interview them. What I will say is that people misunderstand access, that you can be extremely critical of people and still have access.
Can you?
Yes.
Because that's not how I feel. And I understand that I'm not an institution. I'm a podcast. But I think that works if they have nowhere else to go. It's like a collective action problem. If every journalist in America were asking the hard questions, they'd have to answer the hard questions. If you can pick and choose between
the way that I have come to understand it over the years, and being like so critical of Democrats throughout the Obama era and still getting constant interviews with all of the Democrats that we were critical of, up to and including Pelosi, Reid, Schumer, like people who were absolutely lambasting, like consistently, to the point where like Obama's like complaining publicly about us like multiple times throughout his administration, and still having absolutely no problem, because Huffington Post had this gigantic audience of liberals. And so if you are their access to a big audience, then you're going to have access to power to ask them questions. And
right.
So once they understand the size of your audience and how influential you are with that audience, I think that you're going to find that they're not going to care what you said about
Ryan Grim said, please subscribe to Bad Faith on patreon.com/badfaith.
In fact, the more of you who subscribe, then the more likely then politicians have no choice at that point but to then come on if they want access to this influential and sizable audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. But I think it's also true that they can forum shop, especially with these less influential. So if you're AOC and you can go anywhere you want, even the mainstream news wants you, especially given ratings nosedive they're all experiencing right now, then the benefit of coming to some place like the Intercept is that you can have a substantive exchange and get actual progressive ideas out instead of just defending the status quo to Brian Williams, right?
Also, one other point, though, on this claim that I'm about access, I don't even write about these cats that much. The last time I interviewed AOC, I'm pretty sure, was with you in, what was that?
Beginning of 2020, February 2020.
Yeah.
No, 2019.
2019. Yeah, we're 2 years ago. Because the squad in general is not. They're not making news because they're not in.
Right, but it's not just about interviews, Ryan. It's about getting tidbits from their campaign. Leaked memos, and we cultivate relationships as journalists.
Right, but those politicians, they give you stuff not because they like you, but because they feel like they have to, and it's in their interests. Like that's what's going on.
Sure, but they could give it to you, or they could give it to Huffington Post, or they could give it to The Nation, or they could there are options even in the lefty media world to who can break the story. Who's going to get the scoop.
They almost never have scoops. Almost never.
But
they got nothing.
Look, I don't want to belabor this point because this isn't even a point that I have made, but I do think that if you want to undermine or cut the perception that the Intercept is doing access journalism, maybe you think you can just make the argument and people should accept it. And okay, well, you made the argument. We'll see what the people say. My advice, not that anyone's asking for my advice, and this is like a funny position for me to be in, and you can say like,
always
go
happy
away,
to take your advice.
Young grasshopper, like this is not your place to say. But from my perception of how this has gone down online is that it seems obvious that there is a relation, and I felt it being here. It feels obvious that there's a relationship that the Intercept has with some of these people that is unique. Mm-hmm. When I started here, it was like 2 weeks before AOC's primary win, a month maybe before, and I remember feeling like I was on AOC beat, that I was coming up in politics, that AOC was coming up, and I was there when she won, and no one thought it was going to happen. I felt tethered, and like there was a relationship there, and then we did the South by Southwest interview, and
exactly.
you build, and so the idea that there isn't something there, I think, is a little bit. It's a little unbelievable.
Sure, that's fair.
And so the way to set the ship right, and the way to win back the credibility of folks, whether or not you care to, would be to have an interview that is sincerely uncomfortable and adversarial in a way that most of us in the left media space have never really had with them, because up until this point, we've all been on the same page.
Right. No, I get that. It's the claim about the access just got to me.
I know. Look,
killing me. But your point that you and I met her, interviewed her, knew who she was while she was a bartender, before she was AOC. And if you remember at the victory party, which shockingly turned into a victory party, when they first started chanting, they couldn't get the initials right. They were like, OAC, OAC. It's like, and so yes, we were there before that, and so that's different, and I get that, yeah.
Okay. Hey, YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification button so you don't miss future uploads.
And subscribe to Bad Faith at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month. Get premium, subscriber-only episodes and support work like this.